right, good afternoon, everybody. Very warm welcome to each and every one of you. It is now 12 o'clock. It's Friday, the 29th of May, and in Cape Town, the noonday gun has just gone off here. So a very warm welcome to you all. Today, we're in day 64 of lockdown alert level 4. There is anticipation across South Africa mounting, and particularly in the real estate sector, as we approach level 3 lockdown from Monday, the 1st of June. So initially indications were that the real estate sector would only be able to operate at level 2. And now the official announcement has been made that we can operate on level 3, and definitely a positive step. So welcome to you all to Real Estate Investor Talk. This is our weekly thought leadership webinar brought to you by REMAG in conjunction with Let's Talk Property. My name is Neil Peterson, and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Real Estate Investor Mag and the REMAG digital platform. So we host these webinars every Friday, 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, giving you the latest insights on everything in real estate for investors, property practitioners, and industry in South Africa and around the globe. So today, our webinar topic is the rise of PropTech and widespread adoption as a result of COVID-19. Well, is that a fact? Well, we're going to be discussing that. So warm welcome also to our panelists. They will also introduce themselves shortly, as well as to you, the audience. And we welcome your participation in today's webinar. I'm very excited. It's a very esteemed panel we have today. So there's going to be a robust debate, about a topic which I think is on the tip of everybody's tongue at the moment. So to our audience, for the best audio and visual quality, please switch off any other streaming videos or anything else that slows down your internet, which could impact on sound or visual, whatever it may be. If you log off for any reason, you can re-enter the webinar with the same link. On the bottom, you'll see there's a Q&A box, and that is specifically for you, that you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the panelists. So if you could identify the panelists and your question and put that into the Q&A box, and we will deal with those questions in the second half of the webinar. There's also a small chat box, and that is specifically for any technical issues or any general queries or comments that you might have. We also will be sending a poll, and that will come up pop up onto your screen periodically, and it will be multiple choice questions, and we will ask you to vote also during this webinar as well. So without further ado, let's move on to our topic for this week: the rise of PropTech and widespread adoption as a result of COVID-19. What is PropTech? Well, PropTech is essentially the use of information technology to help individuals and companies research, buy, sell, and manage real estate. And PropTech uses digital innovation to address the needs of the property industry. And with us today, we've got a number of people who are leaders in their field, certainly in PropTech and in the real estate industry. So COVID-19 and lockdown has certainly exerted unprecedented disruption in just a few months across multiple countries, but also it's global. It's including South Africa. Economies, real estate companies are struggling, and there's been increased digitalization as a result. We've seen the adoption of Zoom meetings, Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams. So there's definitely been this kind of adoption that's coming to the fore. There's also been adoption of more project management software like Slack, Trello, Avasa, and other cloud-based CRM systems. And in PropTech, we've seen the advent of adoption of virtual property viewings, increased online viewing, online agents, online auctions, online rentals, online property management, online valuations, and more. So let's talk about how can real estate businesses, for those people trying to find how to interact, position themselves for success. How can we close that technology gap? How can technology solve the problems for the property investor and the home buyer? Today, we hear from some of the leaders and early adopters in the PropTech space. So I would like to introduce, starting with all our panelists, starting with JP Farina. If he could introduce himself. JP, over to you.
Thanks, Neil. So I'm JP, and I work for a group, the Process Group, which was spun out of Naspers into the Amsterdam listing. And under Process, we have a company called OLX. And what I do for OLX is that I head up the South African vertical businesses, the two of them being Property 24 and Auto Trader, obviously Property 24 is the relevant business for today.
Great stuff. Okay, so if we could ask Jan, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Neil. Well, I'm Jan Darvel. I live and work in Stellenbosch. I joined PyProp South Africa in January 2019. PyProp is an automated payment platform specific to the rental industry. I ventured out of full-time legal practice in 2002 and have since gained a lot of experience in real estate, property finance, and the franchise sector. Thank you, Neil.
Fantastic. Marcel?
Thanks, Neil. I'm Marcel de Toy. I'm the CEO and founder of Lead Home. We are a tech-enabled estate agency. We're about 4.5 years old. We are the largest single estate agency in Gauteng and growing exponentially in terms of market share.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marcel. Michael?
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Franze. I'm the Managing Director of Satik Prepaid. We're a company focused on prepaid electricity and water that is focused on the landlord property sector. So we don't do any municipal work or government work at all. And our solutions are aimed at helping landlords recover utilities from their tenants via prepaid.
Hey.
We've been in business for about, we've been in business for about 8 years. And we're the largest. So we got about 400,000 meters on our system.
Thanks very much, Michael. Over to you, Hayley.
Thank you, Neil. So Hayley from Lightstone. I've been at Lightstone for about 12 years. I head up the sales there. Lightstone is a company that develops a lot of insights and information around data. We kind of started in the property market developing a valuation model that the banks use in terms of granting of bonds, but have expanded out of that into quite a bit of spatial analytics as well. But I'm here to talk around property today.
Wonderful. Brian. Brian?
Hi guys, my name is Brian Sango. I'm the sales manager of a company called Property Inspect. Property Inspect is your digital aspirant to the inspection headaches, pretty much automating and streamlining communication and all processes to do with the inspection process itself. We've been in the South African and African markets at large for about 4 to 5 years now, originally from the UK. And my personal background has been in property. I've been in the sales space for about 10 years now, and I'm quite the tech enthusiast. Yep.
Wonderful. Gil.
Hi, my name is Gil. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Flow. Flow is a rental platform where tenants are able to find homes that are packaged with deals that are unlocked through their tenant profile. And landlords and agents are obviously able to set themselves apart through packaging their homes and find higher profile tenants. We've been around for just over a year. We've got just over 80,000 tenants using the platform, renting from 4,000 landlords and some of the large institutional landlords.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gil. Ben, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Shaw. I'm the co-founder and CEO of HouseMe. We're a residential rental technology platform, which I know is a mouthful. We disintermediate the agency process in rental management. So we allow tenants and landlords to use our system and our technology to engage at 2.5% instead of paying your usual fee, and also facilitate agencies using our backend system for products like rental guarantee and our deposit-free rental for tenants across the country. We've been around for about 3 years. We've got about 120,000 users, and also looking to grow on the back of this COVID crisis.
Right. Okay, so now let's just kick off the questions, and I'm going to start off with JP of Property 24. JP, how has COVID-19 affected Property 24? I mean, what has happened to the interest and demand on the portal during this period?
So obviously, it's affected us in a number of ways. Both our customers, we have two sets of customers, consumers who are looking to buy and sell property, and estate agents who are marketing their property to those consumers. Both of those are our customers. On the estate agent side, business has stopped dead. So from one day to the next after lockdown, there was absolutely no business happening, and nothing has happened for 64 days. So obviously what happens there is cash flow is immediately cut off from all the estate agents. It's a very stressful time for them. The deeds office stops operating, so even transfers that you had done prior to lockdown are no longer going through. So it creates a really stressful environment with a complete cutoff of cash for our customers. On the consumer side, we saw activity drop immediately. It actually plummeted by about 40%, maybe even more than 40, between 40 and 50%. So when you look at, when there's two things we look at. One is interest, and one is demand. And interest can be defined as people viewing properties, and demand can be defined as people converting to a lead to an estate agent. And both of those metrics declined substantially. But if we look at it on a weekly basis, you had this big dip, and then slowly it has started recovering over these weeks. So you're still actually generating quite a few sale leads and rental leads. And then in this last week, we've actually seen it recover to levels higher, substantially higher than last year. So what it feels like is that there's been pent-up demand in this lockdown period, and the pent-up demand is starting to come online and is actually starting to transact. And so we've gone through a very tough period the last 2 months, and we're hoping now that once we come out of lockdown, we'll actually see a bump, and that bump may very well make up for the lost business in lockdown.
Wow. So what do you predict a recovery like will look like once it's actually lifted? I'm talking about complete lockdown.
Yeah. So
phases. Yeah.
So I think it's everyone's going to have different opinions. My opinion on it is that it's kind of like a tick shape. So you have this big drop, and then you have this slow recovery back to where you were. Now if we look at this V shape that we have now in terms of leads and interest, so we've had this overcorrection into that. And I don't think it's sustainable. You know, I think what it's doing is it's compensating for the loss of sales. It's the pent-up demand that has come back, and we'll see a bump post-lockdown. But after that, I see it flattening down again, and maybe even declining again. And the reason I say that is because, you know, at the end of last year, if you look at last year's sales transactions, you know, according to the data that we have from the deeds office, there was about a 5% reduction in total sales volumes last year. And the reason for that, we have various reasons. One of them being the economy that has not been doing well, and the second being, you know, politics in the country. Now, none of those things have gone away. COVID has just come about and has created a worse situation going forwards. So the economy can't be expected to recover to levels that we had last year. What you will see is you'll see an increase in economic activity straight after lockdown, but longer term, I can't see this year recovering to any kind of level that we were at last year. I think that that by the time we get to the first quarter of next year, we might have normalized to what we've had last year.
Okay. So Marcel, I mean, what do you think COVID will have on the property? What do you think it's going to be a positive effect on the industry? And then I think coupled with that, you know, how has Lead Home Properties changed as a business? You mentioned you were the leader. What's your view?
Yeah. So firstly, I completely agree with what JP said. I think we've seen it in our own data as well. We've had especially on the buyer side, we've had a complete plummeting of buyer inquiries. And then we've had a slow-ish growth. And over the last 2 weeks, we've seen kind of exponential growth. So, you know, from our side, in our data, we see that we are pretty much again at kind of February inquiry levels. But the point JP makes around the economic circumstances of South Africa is spot on. For Lightstone showed that Q1 we were 10% below, down on volume year on year, and I think it's as JP said, as a result of the economy and politics. From our perspective, it's been a hugely challenging 8 weeks. Just so you understand, I mean, firstly, you get your cash flow cut off, as JP said, with the closure of the D's office. But also, we work on a 14-week working capital cycle. So any sales that you didn't do in this 8-week period, in 14 weeks, that catches up with you again. So I think the industry as a whole is going to see a double dip this year. And then, you know, as I agree with JP, I think we're forecasting 50% volume decrease for this year, 25 next year, and then probably only the year after we'll see recovery. obviously dependent on a lot of factors. From our perspective, Lead Home, we've always been a remote first company. So we're quite young and we built the company to be remote friendly. So for us, moving all our staff to work from home was a kind of a one-day thing and worked extremely well. We've always worked with we've built our own CRM. We've got all the CRM tools, the Slack that we work with. So that's been great. I think most importantly has been the adaptation for our agents, making sure that you stay in touch with your client, that you look to give the best customer service. And then the adoption of stuff like virtual tours and virtual viewings. It's quite easy for us to understand. For the consumer out there, it's not so easy. And I think we're going to revert to mean. That's my opinion. By the end of the year, you'll probably see virtual tours being phased out, given the cost inherent in it. And I think people always want to see property. So
Marcel, have you seen any changes in sort of price categories? I mean, is there a certain area of demand? I mean, are you seeing any changes?
Yeah. So from our perspective, we think there's a massive opportunity below the 2 million rand mark. We think that above 3 million, that market's going to take a massive hit. And as an estate agency focused predominantly on sales, for us, it is incredibly important to be competitive there. So from our perspective, we've changed our pricing model from a pure fixed into a kind of a variable model where we look to be competitive in all brackets of the market, and especially in the high volume bracket, which is below the 2 million rand mark. We think that's where the activity is going to be, given the decline in prices. And I think if you play in the above 3 million, it's going to be a very different environment going forward.
Yeah. As an automated payment platform, I mean, specific now to the rental industry, I mean, PayPop has quite stringent qualification criteria for its clients. Why is that? And what is that criteria?
Correct, Neil. We deal only or exclusively with fully accredited or licensed estate agencies, meaning that we deal with professional property practitioners who fidelity fund certificates are in place, who's in good standing with the EIIB, the Financial Intelligence Center, the CIPC, etc. The reason for that is that we create a trust environment it's a suite of trust accounts that are all subject to audits. These accounts are designated Section 32 accounts in terms of the Estate Agency Affairs Act. So we've got more than 1,000 registered estate agencies in this one trust environment. And so we, for our own audit purposes and for our own compliance formalities, we cannot have non-estate agents or non-qualified people in this particular audited space. That's the reason why mostly residential estate agents, but official qualified stand-up estate agencies only.
So, I mean, you guys process hundreds of millions of rands. I mean, I think you mentioned the database, it's 110,000 properties. I'm not sure, you must just verify. I mean, how safe is the client's information, payment, and other data?
Neil, the short answer is very safe. Yes, we're talking of approximately 110,000 properties on which we receive incoming payments, and then we do, on average, approximately 4 to 5 transactions outflowing. It is important to look at the DNA of who PayProp is, where it emanates from. We are part and parcel of a bigger organization, the Human State Group. So between us and Give and Gain, that is our other business, we have been processing money across borders since 2001. To give you an idea, during the previous financial year, we processed payments in excess of 1 billion sterling pounds. We can talk a lot about transaction security, data integrity, etc. But I think the short version for purposes of this conversation is that through PayProp and Give and Gain, we've processed 60 billion rand in payments twice, incoming and outgoing. Every cent is reconciled on a daily basis. We have had fidelity fund certificates and unqualified audits since 2005, and so has every other client of ours. So without going into technical answers, I just think the number says that.
Great. I'm not going to open up a can of worms now, but I think everybody's probably asking the question, how are the volumes looking? I mean, the rental market has gone through, really tough time. Do you want to maybe just share? I mean, the volumes, the average is around about 20%, I think. Do you want to maybe just share what's actually happening?
Yes, Neil, and I think there might be a speck of good news. I'm personally quite pleasantly surprised. Look, and there are many, depending on how you want to massage your data and what you want to arrive at is always important. But so there are always variations on a month-on-month basis. But so if I take the first quarter of this calendar year, January, February, March, and we provide for shorter months, longer months, public holidays, Easter weekend, etc., then overall, our processing volumes were down by an average of 19.6%, let's call it 20%, which is significant. So that is April compared to the first 3 months. It was slightly better than what I expected. What makes it very difficult to understand this particular data is we don't have a view of all the addendums or the arrangements that are in place. So we're not 100% sure what percentage of that almost 20% decrease. We're not sure how much is really default, how much is by arrangement, how much is a damage deposit that has been applied, how many partial payments there were, and then very importantly, what the duration of that arrangement is and how well the agents or the landlords have detailed this as to when repayment should take place. So unfortunately, I have seen documents or addendums that provide, for example, the tenant shall start paying again after COVID-19 or once. So it's very grey and very difficult. One of the biggest dangers, so say for the fact that processing by April has dropped by 19.6%, what was another dangerous trend that we saw in our data is that many agencies reduced their invoicing. It's not across the board, it's very prevalent in particular market segments, but some of our clients reduced their invoicing by 25 to 30%, which from our perspective means that although the processing volume reduces, also the chance of getting processing done in the next month is reduced even more because of non-invoicing. So we've hosted a few webinars and training sessions, and also the gray area in that data is, once again, we do not know whether there are future dated invoices and how far into the future. So maybe in order to land, the positive news, today is our last working processing day of this calendar month, and I'm delighted to say that the invoicing is slightly up. Our clients invoice slightly more. The total value of invoices is slightly up, and then our processing volume for May so far is rounded 2% higher than what it was in April, and I did not expect to see that.
Wow, that's some good news. We need some good news. So, Michael, moving on to you. I mean, you're in the important utility space. Do landlords still need prepaid sub-meters with COVID-19?
So the rationale for prepaid sub-meters is to mitigate risk. So risk of non-payment, mitigate risk around tenants absconding without having paid their full electricity bill, and also for tenants to get a better idea of what their accumulated exposure is and what their risk is of what they need to be paying on electricity. So in an environment where risk has basically gone through the roof, I mean, the risk bound is essentially unlimited at the moment. Nobody really knows. We just need prepaid meters and sub-meters more than ever before. I think if you don't have a prepaid sub-meter now, it just becomes blindingly obvious that you should have done it a few months ago before this all hit the fan. So if somebody's not paying their rent, they really aren't going to be paying their electricity. That is completely outside the question, right? So at least, if landlords had the assurance that their electricity was being paid, at least that takes one question off the table. So yeah, I think more than ever, I'd say.
Okay. So, I mean, you've seen impact on the water and electricity utility use with lockdown?
It's been, yeah, it's been interesting. Similar numbers. So from a residential point of view, the drop has been quite flat. So only about 5%. There was a question when it first started of residential maybe even rising because people spending more time at home, but we're not seeing that at all. I think people are economizing. People are worried about the future, so they're just not using as much electricity as they potentially could, even though they're at home. The light industrial and commercial sectors basically fallen through the floor, so we've seen a 50% drop on that. And yeah, so that just reflects how the economy has basically been switched off. The fact that we're seeing 50% at all is miraculous, but I think that is kind of emergency stuff and food processing and things like that, where there have been a lot of work on. But yeah, to see a 50% drop on commercial industrial is spectacular.
Wow. Okay, so I mean, have you seen the solutions for tenants and landlords? Has it changed? I mean, with the result of COVID-19, I mean, with a prepaid solution, and what is the important criteria? I mean, have you seen any trends or changes there?
Well, I mean, it's been a relatively short time, right? So, I mean, it's hard to pick up trends. The most important thing is remoteness. So if, you know, the meter obviously works remotely, but you also need to have access to the data remotely. You need to be able to monitor what's being purchased remotely. So being able to essentially manage this thing transparently from the outside is really, really important. And prepaid offers that to a large extent. But yeah, I think that the overall trend will be that we just need to have more of these things in place.
Yeah. Okay. Haley, so I know you've got a few slides for us that you're gonna show us, and
later.
Can you maybe show us, you know, how can property valuations be conducted digitally? Because I know you've also come out with a report quite recently as well in terms of property growth and that kind of stuff. So we're talking about trends and going forward. You've got some interesting stuff to show us, don't you?
Thanks, Neil. Maybe just to start off with talking around some of the valuation models that we kind of look at. When we talk digitally and making it being available online, it is obviously available online and people can get valuations on properties. And I think it's becoming more and more needed by the consumer more than anything to understand the asset, the investment in their property. What is the value of it? Do I need to, in times like this, do I need to downscale? Do I need to reinvest? All of those kind of questions come to mind. Lastone has developed a valuation model that obviously the banks use, and we use repeat sales methodology in that model. We have further enhanced it on the technology side, where we've actually developed an AI model coming off the back of it, where we've used imagery with machine learning, and we've actually got a 10 to 13% lift in accuracy, which has been really good. And we're actually currently testing it in the market. So we're quite chuffed about that in terms of getting accuracy around valuation. So I think if we look at that, I mean, look, there's different realms of valuation. There's obviously the valuation models, you get the desktops and you get the physicals. And we obviously, we play a big part in terms of the model side. And then just speaking around the landscape, I mean, look, we've seen a big impact from COVID, various impacts. I resonate with a lot of what JP was saying in terms of what we're anticipating. We've already started seeing some uptick in reports. So we have a sense that there's some estate agents that are already quietly getting stuff done. I mean, you know, we need to get going. This is an economy that needs to be helped. So I'm going to jump across to my slides. Just as a matter of interest, I just pulled this in. We have a partnership with Tracker, where we actually, through the COVID time, we tracked a bit of activity. So week one, what it's showing there, let me just get some of there's basically, how to go back. Let me just try that again, sorry.
Take us through that
We were
slide.
showing,
Early.
yeah, no, it doesn't want to be showed. What we were showing was the activity. So basically we saw the first week was a 10% variance in terms of travel to the normality of what they did. And then by week 5, we were up to 60% of people traveling again. So it really, the lockdown didn't last very long as we had hoped. But yeah. And then what I wanted to do was I just wanted to get onto some of the property sales and what we had seen. So I think one of the big things for us was we tried to do a comparison of what we had experienced now to the 2008. For us now has been quite a black swan, in the sense that if we look at what was experienced before the 2008, and if everybody recalls kind of what happened, so essentially there was the big global crash in the US, and the oil prices spiked through the roof. We had a lending rate of over 15%. So things were really tough on the economy wise. And if you can see the volume of transactions, high. We had a purchase price sitting at the top here.
When you finish it, I can drop it off. Someone else can maybe use it.
Oh.
It's just lying there on the table.
Oh. So what we can see basically is that the change in volume of transactions has never really picked up since 2008, which is interesting. What we did see was a pickup in terms of property price. So for us, in terms of volume, that really did take a dip. Price-wise, we've kind of sustained kind of where we are. What we are anticipating coming out of this is that obviously volumes will never pick up, but property prices will be affected. So, and I'll get into the next slide on that. What we did in terms of predicting where we anticipating this is going to take us, we had a scenario 1, which is basically where we said GDP would decline by 3%. We had a deflationary effect on the CPI and further drop in interest rates. And if you can kind of see across the board, there's negative except the mid-value, which is kind of your mid-value is sitting 750K and below, to give you a sense in terms of the market. We then did a scenario 2 in terms of house price indices. And what we did there was we basically took GDP at a drop of 6%, no noticeable reduction in CPI inflation, and limited room for inflation, for interest rate adjustments. And immediately you can see everything is on the negative. So specifically, if you look at your freehold, this is obviously a national view. Your freehold's really down. Your luxury is going to take the biggest knock. And then what we did was scenario 3 is obviously really not the scenario that we want to play out. We are anticipating scenario 2 to be the one most likely. Scenario 3, basically we have a negative GDP growth of 10%, increase in CPI inflation. That leads to reversal of kind of downward interest rate cycle. So basically what ends up happening as well is our interest rates just start increasing. So obviously, once again, the yellow bars showing the negative link across that. With scenario 2, we are anticipating a drop of about 8.8% in terms of property values, which is obviously not ideal. The biggest chunk obviously being in the luxury market. We are anticipating drop between 15 and 20% of value if we kind of anticipate what's going to be coming out of it. We do also, to JP's point, we do see a blip happening where there's going to be a little bit of activity and then once again a slowdown. I think the other component that we can't negate is the fact that through this process, the banks have become very credit and risk focused. And I think as much as we're going to be trying to sell properties, I think there may be a pullback in terms of granting of bonds with some of the big financial institutions, and that was what we were anticipating.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ailey. I think we actually got a big finance webinar next week with all the bankers, all the various type of, so it'll be interesting to hear from them. But thanks very much. It's interesting data. Does the panel agree with that? And what are your predictions? But we can talk about that just now. I want to ask Brian of the Property Inspector. So Brian, how do you see people in the property space changing their way of doing things around property inspections from here going forward, specifically as a result of COVID-19?
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, very, very good question. So, I mean, before COVID-19, Property Inspect and a whole other players in the tech space had obviously been strongly advocating for PropTech. You know, we've been hearing a lot about the term itself, but the absorption from the industry itself was not as rapid as one would have expected, simply because people, you know, they'll rather stick to the tried and tested, and sometimes they don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to the processes that they follow. And now here we have it fast track into 2020. COVID-19 happened. We somewhat didn't see anything of this magnitude coming. And I think it just really forced people into a corner where they need to just reevaluate everything that they do and just find the easiest way out. So it's been a very challenging time, but we've actually seen an increase in interested parties coming to the table, because now they see that perhaps a technological solution for various aspects of what it is that they cover would be something that they need to look at. So in the property space itself, we could see a number of people now slowly moving away from the manual process around inspections and looking for something more tech-enabled, simply because it's going to help them to either reduce the time that they need to spend in various properties. It could minimize the contact that is required between parties associated, tenants, rental agents, management agents, you name it. And we also could see a rise in standalone inspection companies, because perhaps a number of players in the rental space or any inspection space are going to think, you know what, might as well outsource that operation completely so as to focus on the business development side, especially from this point on, because a lot of people have lost out on a lot of incomes. They've had to let some few people go and so forth. So everyone is really going to start on Monday, actually. Everyone is really going to start thinking of how to get all that money starting to come in, and anything else that they can sort of delegate to other third parties will most likely happen. So I see some inspection companies getting an increase in companies that want to make use of their services. That's one. I see a number of players within the property space now certainly looking to use technological tools to their advantage. What we did during COVID-19 as well during the lockdown, I mean, COVID-19 will likely remain with us for a while. But what we did during the lockdown was we also released a functionality called the self-service feature. Now, self-service meaning, because everyone was absolutely limited to what sort of access they have to the properties that they manage, with self-service, you enable your tenant or property occupant to be able to digitally complete a checklist that has been customized by you as the rental agent or the managing agent, allowing you to take multiple photos, videos of whatever space it is that you occupy, and in real time, all that data being accessible to whosoever needs to see it without them necessarily gaining access into the property. This was just in an effort to try help people stay on top of whatever's happening in the properties, because 8 weeks or, you know, a lot could happen during that time. Some move out inspections are meant to happen, some move in inspections are meant to happen, and you certainly just want to know what's happening within the properties. So that alone as well just made people see, in essence, that, you know, you certainly can make use of technology to stay on top of some of the things that you're meant to cover. Yeah.
Excellent. Great stuff. Thank you very much, Brian. Moving on to Gil. Now, Gil, I know you've also got some slides to show us. I mean, you're in the very important tenant space. And I know, I mean, how do tenants view the requirements of technology in their leasing process? You want to show us also some stats of what's happened over the last couple of months?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, maybe I can start with those stats. The context to it is that like I mentioned earlier, we've got just over 80,000 tenants on the platform. And, you know, we kind of thought at the time when COVID-19 hit us all that we have the ability to ask all of these tenants how it's affected them. And we obviously wanted to share that with the industry. So that's the flow findings report that we've done, which is available on our website on findings.flow.rent. But let me just take you through two findings, particularly, that I think are relevant to the topic here, and then to answer your question. So I'll just share my screen quick. So I'll just jump straight to this one. We asked the tenants generally how COVID-19 has affected their affordability, and what is it that they're doing in terms of actually surviving through it, and the different financial assistance options that they may have. So firstly, unsurprisingly, most people have been somehow affected by it. The main stat is that only 37% of tenants can comfortably pay their rent in full. Of the rest, there are tenants who are going for alternative means of subsidizing their rents, and some of those examples are just loans, friends and families, negotiating with their landlord, which is a big topic in our findings as well. So I think the first finding here is very relevant in that it's obviously hit everyone quite dramatically. But if I just jump to this one, what we also asked them is, what is the sentiment between you and the landlord? And one slide before this, which I won't dive into now, is we also asked them, have you actually spoken to your landlord? And if you have, what sort of arrangements have you come to? So most people have, over 60% of people have spoken. They've had the conversation with their landlord, which is obviously step one. And about 40% of landlords are relatively forgiving, where they're offering either reduced rent or deferred rent. Very few are being, very clinical about it and pulling out the agreement and saying, no, dude, you got to pay. Now, the sentiment part, which is really the question about PropTech and where does PropTech fit in, and has it is there a leapfrog effect now with PropTech because of COVID-19? Generally, the sentiment, the NPS score that we ran, which is like a cross-industry method of measuring sentiment between you and your customer, it was relatively low before. It was just on okay, basically. And it dropped to, over here, it dropped to 14, minus 14. It's a 16% drop in the sentiment between the relationship of the tenant and the landlord. Now, the more important part here is because Flow is generally a platform of engagement, and we have the opportunity to create that engagement and the relationship through a digital form, which really, bridges a lot of gaps in terms of how tenant and agent engage. It's far more efficient, far more immediate. Those tenants that are engaging more with the landlord via a platform like ours have a less of a negative sentiment. And the reason for that is that the main thing that a landlord can do that we found here, in order to reduce his risk, is to create some form of goodwill with their tenant, so that when it comes time to create decision for the tenant or whether to move on or not, bearing in mind, of course, there are practical reasons, like you've outgrown the place, but there's an immediate correlation or a direct correlation to a reduction of churn. And so platforms like Flow and several others, or many others, where they facilitate a better relationship, a more transparent, a more immediate relationship with landlords, provide the ability for those landlords to reduce the risk, because it's a platform, an efficient way to create goodwill with the tenant. Of course, goodwill means loyalty. Loyalty means reduction in churn. Reduction in churn obviously has a massive effect on the risk of the investment for the landlord. So yeah, I mean, in short, we have seen a lot of landlords looking, considering this offering where they haven't before. We've seen the language change, even where a lot of these landlords, and particularly we deal with big enterprise landlords, the language has changed from a transactional language to a this is my customer language. You know, that those relationships are important, and they understanding the need for the adoption of technology. To end off, also, there's obviously a different type of psyche that one needs to consider on how both a tenant and a landlord approach. So our focus has been on this concept of generation rent, or this trend rather, which are younger renters who are renting for longer, between 22 to 40 even. Naturally, those individuals are far more tech savvy. They expect things, far more instant and far more digital, far more transparent. So they're coming into an industry and a major part of their life with that expectation already, because they have that available to them across other industries and engagements with other, with other companies or partners or brands in their life, and they do expect it, and therefore the adoption is far easier. On the landlord and the agent side is where we have seen definitely an increase in interest, at least, to adopt something like this.
Great, thank you. Okay, last but not least, I'm just conscious of time, and we also got some questions coming in. I encourage people to fire away. We have got a good couple here, which we'll put across to the panel now. And so I'd like to talk to Ben. Thanks for that insight, Gil. That was great. Very interesting insights there. So Ben, from HouseMe's perspective, how are people coping with the current crisis? I mean, how have prices been affected, interest rates, property prices, etc.? And what do you think the medium-term impact on the industry will emerge from lockdown? What are your views on that?
Yeah, so I think we've got two different answers there. I think in the short term, which let's call it the lockdown diaries, I think the last few months and possibly extending into the new month as well, there's been a focus on retention to reduce the churn. As Gil mentioned, that means landlords are taking conservative view of whether they can place a new tenant. They're putting in place as much as possible mechanisms to improve the liquidity of that tenant, saying, look, fine, don't pay now, pay a bit later, or can we monetize your deposit? Or indeed, can we shorten this agreement so that, all right, you can't pay for the next 8 months that you should have, but let's actually agree that you move out after 3. So those are all happening, and I think that will continue in the short term. The medium term, that's a very difficult question to answer, and it really does depend on your view of the market. So I'm going to disagree a little bit with what has been said. I think pre-COVID, South Africa already was in a difficult economic situation, and I think the answers that have been given on the recovery assume that the risk we've taken here is not systemic. I don't think that that's true. I think we're now in an economic environment where we have systemic risk across not just South Africa, but actually global. How long that lasts, I'm not sure. The bankers are earning big fees predicting it. I think that we're probably looking at a negative increase in rent between 10 and 15% over the next 12 to 18 months. I think that the recovery is earliest towards the second half of next year. And the implication of that is twofold. Firstly, that will have a knockdown effect on pricing of property, especially because many investors treat the yield in rent as a proxy for value, as a multiple. So that's going to have an impact. And I think that will therefore increase the volume of transactions, but not necessarily the value. I think that's what we're predicting. That actually translates to the rental game as well. We think it's going to become more commonplace for tenants to negotiate shorter lease periods because they'll want to renegotiate in 3, 4, 5, 6 months' time. Landlords, on the other hand, will do anything to get the tenant in, so they'll happily take the rents that they can collect now. But, and I think it was mentioned by Haley, affordability is going to be a massive consideration. So Jan's comment from PayProp's side on exactly how well invoiced an agency might be is not necessarily the same as how well they're collecting. And on Flow Living's webinar a short while ago, one of the agencies sort of explained that they were down pre to sort of into lockdown. So before lockdown, their collection rate dropped into the lockdown period by almost 20%. That's very difficult for agencies to manage if you've got big rental books. And so I think, medium term, to answer the question, we're going to move into a position where liquidity is important. It's seen a great spike in interest in our deposit-free policy, for example, where tenants can not have to pay a deposit in order to pay out their rent. We're going to see collections being increasingly asked for as a service, whether it's standalone or part of your offering. And we're going to look at cost efficiencies for both tenants and landlords as they navigate what I as explained. I think it's going to be a very tough market for the next sort of 18 months. The blue sky, or the sort of the silver lining, if I may, the silver lining here is that assets do get rebased from time to time. And so if we do see a correct rebase, a normalization of property prices relative to demand across the country, then we will go back to quite a stable trajectory, because we still have, as a developing economy, we still have good fundamentals for growth. But I don't think we will see that in the next 12 months at all.
Okay, great. Okay, so is everybody in agreement, or do we have the panel sort of scattering around? So I want to deal with some general questions first. So I want to open up, and this is really for the entire panel. I mean, I have got very specific questions there. And it's one particular one that I think we have to look at is, as people who think in first world terms, more affluent people use technology to transact, be online for Zoom meetings, use PropTech, etc. How do the panelists suggest we overcome the connectivity and data cost issues for the lower end of the market, which make up the majority of the population? I don't know if any one of you got a viewpoint on that. Anybody want to have a go?
Yeah, I'll just answer from Housme's perspective.
Yeah, Ben and then JP. Ben, you go first.
Okay. So the segment of the market that we serve, and we've got rentals from sort of 3,000 Rand and up. My suggestion for all PropTech companies is that it's absolutely up to us to improve engagement. So it's up to us to have products that require less data, to explain the process, to have good enough user experience, to walk someone through a journey. And I think that it is possible. We'll also see the outcome of this lockdown is that there has been a very strong level of adoption on online services. So hopefully that plays out to help.
Okay, JP?
Yeah, so from our perspective, it's quite interesting because property is one of the, so if you look at bandwidth usage in the country, you have the video, Showmax and Netflix, etc., right at the top, the streaming services, and then you have a huge gap to the next group of sites, content sites, and property sites is actually one of the highest, because, and the reason is because you are trying to deliver to user high resolution images, because that's what users consistently want with property. I mean, even on mobile, you're trying to deliver them the best possible experience because it's so important in the property space. So it is high bandwidth intensive. Obviously, we try and optimize as much as we can, but I think this, the spectrum, the freeing up of spectrum in this country is hugely important, because that is what's going to drive pricing down. And also, we hope that that the backhaul and ISP players don't start going backwards in terms of charging for peering, because the free peering agreements in this country that have been created since MWeb opened up have reduced bandwidth prices substantially across the country, and we're starting to see some of those ISPs start questioning the free peering and start because we peer, as an example, we have enough data that we actually peer with some of the ISPs, and we're seeing some of them question us in terms of that peering agreement. So those are two things.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question for you, Michael. Does Satik see more prepaid meter breaches as a result of consumers being under pressure?
So we haven't noticed anything directly, definitely not on the actual consumption side. But it's to be expected, though, that over time, somebody who just can't afford anything might take the next desperate step and try and disconnect their meter. But in general, no, we haven't seen a massive jump. And it's been one of the features, actually, of this lockdown, is that people have generally stuck to the rules. We could have expected anarchy and riots in the streets, and people have, by and large, complied. And disconnecting your prepaid meter would be kind of fall into that compliance space. I think one of the, so just to maybe just pick up on some of the questions and some of the discussion, is the kind of two big themes that I've kind of picked up in in all the panelists' stuff. And the one is that it's around risk, managing risk, and how do we deal with the risk of COVID. And then the other one is transparency and building that relationship with your tenants. And so the flow presentation, I think, is really, really interesting, is to say, there's actually a sentiment thing that is really important, and building that trust and building that relationship now during a really, really hard time, you can actually be capitalized on. So once the crisis passes and that trust has been built, that should pay off for a long, long time going forward. And those are two things where technology plays a big part. Technology in most industries can reduce risk and can improve transparency. So that's definitely something that PropTech could bring to the game.
Great stuff. Marcel, question for you. Just in terms of looking at international markets, we see the wholesaler method of buying property is quite a popular method, particularly in the US. Do you see that, coming into the South African market and kind of into your space? Do you think there's room for that? Because the real question is asking you to say, well, how do you see your business now transforming post COVID-19? Do you see other disruptors coming in?
So I assume you're talking about the for sale by owner market, right?
Yeah.
So I think JP can offer stats from their for sale by owner offering. We fundamentally believe that the role of the estate agent is not going to go away. The reality is you only sell a property on average once every 14 years in South Africa, and that being a high value, low volume transaction means there's a lot of scope for things to go wrong. Therefore, people want to interact with professional advisors. So I fundamentally don't believe that the for sale by owner market is going to take market share. I also don't think that the online only kind of sale model is something that's sustainable. We haven't seen any model internationally where it's worked, and in South Africa, it hasn't taken off despite various trying. So we fundamentally believe in the role in the estate agent. We see the gap as being, how do you make an estate agent more efficient? How do you empower them to make more sales and make more money and give better customer service? From our perspective, I don't think our business is going to change. In fact, I think it's going to accelerate our growth now going forward, given our investment in technology historically and going forward. And again, we see the future as tech enabled, but human run.
Yeah. So I think, for the agents out there, the traditional guys, they're saying, well, is that the end of us? And you just said human run.
Human run, but I think the old school traditional estate agent is going to die. I think unless you upskill yourself and join a business that is technology first, I think you will die. So there's a huge amount of scope for improvements and process efficiencies. Technology obviously plays a central role in that. And I think if you work on Excel to be your CRM and you work on paper, you are going to die. Therefore, it needs to be a technology enabled, but a human agent.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Gil, I'm going to go over to you. It's probably not one that is...
Neil, you're missing JP there.
Oh, JP. Sorry, JP. Do you want to add to that?
I just wanted to agree with Marcel there. He makes a good point. So Property24 has got an option for consumers to list their own property for sale, and we've had it there for a couple of years, and it's really tiny. It's you get hardly any listings, and the people that do list aren't generally that successful. Where we get much more volume is actually in people listing to rent themselves. That's actually the much bigger volume. I think we get about 1,000 a month of people listing to rent their property. But I think what is happening, what's happened with COVID is it is fast forwarding a lot of trends that were happening prior, and that is that estate agents, you need the estate agent in the transaction. However, there's a lot of inefficiency in the way that the market deals with estate agents, or the way estate agents deal with the market. A lot of people, I've had so many conversations where people say to me, estate agents are so expensive, they're overcharged, whatever. And I say, but do you understand what you're paying for? Because you're not paying for that little piece of work that you see the estate agent do when they sell the house. You're paying for the other 100 customers that didn't buy the house as well. So you've got to understand the efficiencies in the sale process to understand why estate agents have to charge what they do. And there are certainly ways to improve those inefficiencies, which I think is what Marcel was talking about.
Right, sir. Okay, we're coming to the end of the webinar, but what I want to do is there's quite a few questions here, and I'm going to put the questions who they were directed to, and maybe to that person they can answer that question, and then at the same time thereafter, then just sort of do a wrap up. So what I'm going to ask is, and I don't know who wants to have a crack at this one. I've certainly got a view. It's related to blockchain, and how will blockchain be incorporated in property, and what are the benefits of blockchain in real estate? Is there anybody here who would like to have a view on that? Who has it? There we go, JP over there. He's a taker, and I'm sure Gil, you might have some views on that too.
Yes, I think that there's so much scope for blockchain to be used, and I mean, the optimist in me says that one day it's going to make things a lot better, because there's so much inefficiency that can be removed by using blockchain. I mean, the first thing is clearly the deeds office. If property could be registered by blockchain, the costs of registering property would be hardly anything, would be zilch. So there's huge scope to help consumers and buyers and sellers and take value to the market using blockchain. But that to me is the biggest one. I mean, I'm sure you guys have other ones.
Yes. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to incorporate these. I'm going to put through some of the generalized questions that have come through from the audience. One is related to municipalities. I mean, should the municipalities consider lowering property valuations? And if they have, should they be decreased? Because everybody seems to have taken a haircut from the agents to the rental market and that kind of stuff. So the question really is, shouldn't the municipalities also be the ones also that should be reducing their costs? I don't know, Gil, do you want to have a crack at that? And maybe Jan, is that something that you would maybe like to make a comment on? And we're talking utility costs, right? So remember, it's utility. So Brian, you should be working with Michael and you together in terms of the property. You should be pulling together, guys. Gil, do you want to comment on that?
No, I mean, I think there's some guys with more context here on a question like that. Let me grab another question after that.
Okay, not a problem. Jan, have you got a view on that?
Neil, also not immediately in my view, and I'm not too up to date. I can just in previous experience.
Let me speak for the municipalities. So the way that
in this discussion,
I deal with them, yeah. So if you look at it from their point of view, they're a non-profit system. So they will work out what their budget is, and then they will divide it out among all the various revenue streams that they can do, property tax being one of them. So, I mean, all they're going to see is a hit. I mean, they're already down. The City of Cape Town announced today that they're really sitting with a 15% hole, and there's no savings, there's no buffer to fall back on. So they're in the same pot as we are, and all ratepayers of those cities are in the same pot as everybody else. So no, I think when the economy takes a beating as it has now, I think we're all just suffering one way or another, and there's just no scope for them to absorb a cost because they just don't have the buffers.
Absolutely. Haley, there is a question related to house prices. When do you think that house prices will be at the lowest? And when will the property market turn around? Wow, that's a tough question.
No, look, that's crystal ball stuff. I think that we're going to be in a year and a half to 2 years to kind of get back to where we were before COVID, is my sense. I think the market will need to recorrect and kind of go through the normal track that it does. And I think by then we should be back to where we were. It's really difficult to predict time-wise, but that's what we're anticipating. Nobody knows how long COVID's going to be around for. And I think that's part of the biggest struggle, is if we had an end date, it would be easier to predict, but it's really difficult.
Right. Okay, so to Jan and Gil, in terms of the future of your business, let's look at sort of a post-COVID. Let's talk about 18 months down the line. What differences do you see? Because I think, Gil, you've probably been under pressure. You've got a reward-based system. Have your tenants received rewards? Well, they haven't paid you. They don't receive the reward, right? So maybe we just want to comment around that. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, we definitely are already seeing a leapfrog effect, meaning that there's going to be an adoption of technology and an adoption of platforms like Flow because out of necessity, rather than just the general adoption of technology or products that kind of follows a normal trend. Right. So in 18 months, our view is that this has in a way been an opportunity to accelerate our roadmap and the adoption of a product like ours. I think that the requirement for both an agent and a tenant to consummate a lease, it's an opportunity now out of necessity for people to consummate a lease digitally because of the social distancing requirement, but it obviously comes with its tremendous efficiencies, and so that's where I think there'll be an acceleration. However, yes, I mean there's obviously pains because as a startup that really relies on funding, our revenues are obviously down like everyone else has been across the board. So it's we're essentially just mimicking the economy, but overall it's an opportunity we're trying to embrace in terms of adoption of technology.
Okay. So maybe you can also just go end off on the wrap up, sort of going forward in terms of the adoption of technology in your business. And I think the future, I mean, you're on 80,000. Where would you like to be? What's the big number? Maybe give us where's the dream going forward for Flow?
Now, the dream is, of course, global domination. But yeah, I mean, realistically, I think that people are renting more and more, and one of the things that we believe are going to be further accelerated is that there's going to be a shift in the market of people moving into renting. Not only because of, we've always said, because of lifestyle choice, because of a certain generation, but because of affordability. So again, more now than ever. So the dream is to be a dominant player in the South African market and similar markets. It's a community that unlocks value for everyone, and it's an absolute win-win way of making an efficient transaction out of something that is so critical for people. It's their housing, and it's the most expensive part of their life.
Wonderful. Thanks. Nice way to wrap up. Thank you, Gil. Jan, I'm going to move on to you. Where do you see your business 2 years from now? I mean, you got big numbers there. I mean, in terms of that rental. How do you see things panning out in the future, and more specifically in terms of technology, more technology coming into your business? What do you foresee?
Thank you, Neil. Yes, we are continuously developing, and as a business, we are enablers of estate agents. We're not disruptors, we are enablers. I think Marcel, tech-enabled but humanly run is pretty much where we are going to be. So the question is, in 2 years' time, is it going to be estate agents enabling tech or tech enabling estate agents? There's this conversation which has been ongoing for quite some time.
Yeah.
So yes, we are doing our best to enhance the experience for the estate agent and the consumers, being it landlord or tenant. At the moment, our exclusive clients are the estate agents, but we need to equip them. So we've got landlord applications doing things real-time, live updates, but we will euro the estate agent. And for time to come, our view is expansion and continuous improvement of the platform, keeping it safe, reliable, steady. So the next 2 years, I tend to disagree a little bit with some of the other panelists. I also see a negative increase in rentals, but probably not double digits. I'm more along the line of a 4-5%, I would say, on average for the next year or two. I also do not believe that lease terms are going to be significantly shorter. It's simply not practical. Try and move a mother and children, and you'll find that they wouldn't want to move every 4 months. So yes, there are many ebbs and flows, and there's a change. I mean, the lower interest rate market, the depreciation of properties, the fact that, for example, short-term lets and Airbnbs are coming onto the market. It's going to have a significant correction in property prices, especially in the more affluent market. So first-time home buyers is a bit grey. I think we'll see less of that, but we're in a seriously buyer's market. And then a last thing that I must add is the geographics and demographics in South Africa play a significant role in everything that we've been discussing. Unlike European markets, for example, we sit with 3 distinctively different residential markets. And with all due respect to some of the panelists, they operate in specific metro areas, which is significantly different to the national stat or the national consumer behavior. And I think we should be cautious of that.
Wonderful. Brian, you're sitting over there, we're back on. And so I mentioned and I alluded a little bit earlier on, just in terms of maybe working with the likes of Satik Prepaid and even with these other part of the whole rental solution, because property inspection seems to be taken far more seriously in countries like the UK and the US. And I mean, while we've got while they are here in South Africa, it's probably not to the extent. I think it's almost law in the UK and the US. So where do you see your business in terms of the whole sort of tech offering? Where do you see that going forward? And maybe just give us a wrap at the end on that.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. Yeah. So I really see more growth for Property Inspect and perhaps any other player in the space, to be honest. And what I've seen, having worked in different areas of the world, because I get to engage with our clients in the USA, in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Growing it in a market such as South Africa and the rest of the rest of Africa has been a bit slower than everywhere else, because property inspections is a serious thing in the UK. And so what we see is we definitely are seeing more people slowly embracing that technological offering. And with us, we very diverse in the sense that it's not just in the residential space that we play in. We've got people in the commercial space, in the hospitality space. We've got any sort of company that has warehouses or any properties that they regularly need to oversee maintenance on. They're going the technological route. So manufacturing companies, you've got storage companies, you name it. So we're really going to see more and more people, valuation as well, perhaps looking at digital solutions or a digital way to use a tech-enabled system to just make the whole process much easier. So the banks, whenever they have their appointed valuator panel, perhaps now they would look at using systems such as Property Inspect. We have a couple already that are looking into it. We've already been having ongoing discussions with them. So it's a right indicator for us, because it shows that, okay, slowly but surely, some of these entities are really seeing that it's time to evolve and change with the times. Because change is always good. You know, aside from the challenges that this has brought onto everyone, it's definitely going to bring some eye-opening that we needed as a nation, as an industry. And I think to just jump back to one question that was asked around data costs and everything, I'm not well equipped on I didn't major in any communications or anything like that. But I think what I wanted to just highlight was that one thing for sure is, as PropTech has been a thing and is continuously showing how advantageous it is for the consumer and the service provider and so forth, I still feel there's a lot more that it can do in certain areas of South Africa. For example, the affordable housing market and your township areas has not necessarily seen PropTech go and do what it needs to do, because that demographic makes up a huge portion of South Africa, meaning there's loads of opportunities that lie in that. And one thing for sure, which which is probably why we've somewhat eased into operating in some of those markets, is the fact that the platform works offline. So I guess what I'm trying to highlight is this also could be an opportunity for other startups that can also target such areas and bring in whatever offering that they have. Because look, if you have any PropTech solution, meaning you're addressing a problem that certain people are facing, then they're definitely going to take it up. As it stands right now, people in the township still need lots of PropTech to come their way.
Okay, great stuff. Nice way to finish, Brian. Marcel, your wrap up. I'm just conscious of time, and we've got still Ben, and we still got Michael. Am I right? Let's wrap up. Have we given everybody a chance to wrap up? Haley, did I give you the chance? Everybody? Yeah? Is anybody last say? So Marcel, over to you. Wrap up.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. I think for us, the opportunity over the next 2 years is to take exponential market share. We think that the number of estate agents in the country will decrease. And we definitely think the value of commissions are coming down. So you need to be tech enabled to be efficient and actually get some margin. We are looking to increase our agent footprint across the whole of South Africa. So if there are agents who are keen to chat, please do let me know. And then we're obviously keen. We work with most of the panelists, Jan and Haley and JP, etc. So we're obviously always keen to continue working together for the best of the industry.
Great stuff. Wonderful. Nice way to wrap up. And Ben, over to you in closing.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Neil. It's been really insightful for panel. Maybe just three things. Firstly, I think one of the inevitabilities of where we are at the moment is that there will be a level of consolidation and of partnership. Marcel's just alluded to it. I think we're going to see verticals contract. We're going to see a lot more collaboration. And I think what some of us have referred to as your more traditional agencies are going to look not to build or to compete, but rather to partner or consolidate with your tech efficiencies that some of us or some of the PropTech companies have built. Secondly, I think that there's going to be a rebasing of price and affordability. I think that they go hand in hand. I think that collection has become, as I pointed out earlier, one of the key drivers of rental, and similarly bank finance for sales in the other side of the coin. And then lastly, I'll just point out that I think there's a tremendous value in not just property technology solving problems of efficiency, but also solving for the problem of transparency. And that's a theme I think that's come across from a number of people. Both tenants and landlords want to understand who they're dealing with, but equally so, agents, if they're aware, and they are, that commission is going to come under threat, they want to know exactly what they're getting from their agent, what efficiencies are getting built, how are they securing their future by choosing to stay in a traditional agency. And we've seen, unfortunately, very sad headlines about the fact that some agencies just can't offer that future. So I think consolidation is coming, and it positions us well as a group of PropTech entrepreneurs. And we hope we can navigate the storm with consumers served better than ever.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ben. And your closing comments, please, Michael.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep it short. I think I see two scenarios going forward, and hopefully only one. And that is that, you know, in a situation like this where we're looking at U-shaped recoveries and things are tough, there's just tons of opportunity for PropTech. I mean, our business is fundamentally counter-cyclical. The more risk goes up, the more people need our product. The scenario to avoid is kind of a collapse scenario, where the government just keeps lockdown going, businesses collapse. In the end, you can only do this for so long. And we're all assuming that 2 years from now, you know, there's been some kind of recovery and everything's great, but collapse can be brutal, you know, and I don't think any of us have experienced anything like that. So, you know, putting pressure on governments to make sure that they avoid these extended lockdowns, and it's really critical, because I think as long as we get to the other end, we'll all have done well out of it, every single one of us here, because we're the ones that are the future, and we'll have adapted and we'll have made it work. But we have to have that future to reach towards.
Touche. Thank you. And I think on that note, I think we're going to close the discussion. I want to thank each and every single one of you on the panel: Ben Shaw, CEO of HouseMe, Michael Franza, CEO of Satik Prepaid, JP Farina, CEO of Property24, Marcel du Toit, CEO of Lead Home Online, and Gil Sperling, CEO of Flow Rent. and Jan Darvel, who's the CEO of PayProp, and Haley Ivandowns, Sales Director of Lightstone, and Brian Sanger, also Sales Director of Property Inspect. Thank you very much, guys. That was a very insightful discussion. I also want to thank you, the audience. I think this is going to be an ongoing thing. I think we'll have lots more of these kind of discussions going forward. There are a number of questions, so we like to send it through to you. So if you don't mind afterwards, we will send some of the questions through to some of the panelists, ask them to answer. So if you don't mind, we can send that through. Next Friday, we're talking finance. So we got the banks, we got the bond originators, we got variances of different financing options that we have in South Africa. And this is our panel that we have. And it's going to make for very interesting discussions in terms of where to get finance. That's what everybody is saying. Where is the money? But you've been an awesome panel. You're leaders in the field. We look forward to seeing you all and working with you going forward. And to you, the audience, thank you very much. Also, there's one more announcement. Real Estate Investor Talk, in conjunction with Let's Talk Property, are doing a full day. Well, it's a half day starting. It's full day for people if you're sitting in front of your computer. We're from 9:30 to just after lunchtime, and it's going to be a virtual masterclass where we're going to have 60 different presenters over 60 hours of content. And obviously, we'd like to get a lot of you guys that are on this panel involved in that. And we've already set that up, and it's all going to be done virtually. This is the way forward, guys. So it looks like this is how we could meet in future. So on that note, I just want to thank you, the panel. It's just once again, thank you, and you, the audience. And I'll end off with a final quote from Charles Darwin that says, "It is not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change." And I think on that note, I'd like to thank you, the audience, and for you, the panelists. It's wonderful. We'll see you next week, next Friday. Thank you very much. Stay safe and successful investing.